بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Welcome back to a brand new course and indeed a brand new book. So this is going to be interesting for both me and for you because this is something new that we haven't done thus far. In this course, Usul al Fiqh 2, we will read or begin reading in the text known as Lubb al-Usul by Shaykh al-Islam Zakaria al-Ansari rahimahullah. So when we say Shaykh al-Islam in the Shafi'i madhab, we are referencing Shaykh Zakaria al-Ansari rahimahullah, who was really a Renaissance man and mashallah wrote in almost every subject. So he took Jam' al-Jawama of al-Subki, he condensed it into Lubb al-Usul, and it was so condensed that he himself wrote his own commentary on it, Ghayat al-Usul. In this class, we will read his text only, and I will provide the commentary. Alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me the great gift that I have translated actually a little bit usul myself, so we'll be working with my translation of the text. Now, this is a medium to semi-advanced type of text, largely because it is based on the book, Jam' al-Jawama of the Usul al Fiqh that we use, and also because the text is very condensed. So sometimes you gotta kind of stretch out the meanings, and it will sometimes when we read the text, it might not really make apparent sense. Hopefully, we'll comment on it. We'll come back to the text and we'll read it and understand. The class will follow the same format. We will be reading the Arabic and then the translation and then the commentary, but I won't read all of the Arabic in one stretch because it's quite a lot of text. We will read it, sentence by sentence. In today's class, inshallah, we will read the author's introduction. Obviously, we'll learn why he's doing what he's doing. And then we will take the first three definitions that we find in the text, which is the definition of Usul al Fiqh, and then the definition of Fiqh, and then definition of a Sharia ruling, al-Hukm al-Shara'i. So most usul books will begin with definitions, and in fact this whole module basically will be definitions and the use of words. And those are the three, other than the introduction, those are the three definitions that we will take, inshallah. Of course, when I say definition, it's not like a definition we just go on. We have to explain why the definition is the way it is, what is included and what is excluded. I'll see you back to begin our discussion, inshallah. Alright, so inshallah we will begin the way we usually begin, which is to turn to the original text, but in this case, as I said in the introductory clip, I'm not going to read it in one go because it will just be too much. So we'll kind of read it piecemeal, inshallah, followed by the translation. So let us begin. قال المصنف رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلومه في الدارين آمين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي وفقنا للوصول إلى معرفة الأصول ويسر لنا سلوك مناهج بقوة أودعها في العقول والصلاة والسلام على محمد وآله وصحبه الفائزين من الله بالقبول. So he says, and he begins with the Basmala, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate. Obviously, because this is the way we begin everything. We begin with the Basmala, and then the Hamdallah, and then prayers on the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam. Because of the hadith that everything that is of importance that does not begin with the Basmala or the Hamdallah, it is cut off from its barakah. كل أمر ذي بال لا يبدأ فيه بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. And in another narration, Bilhamdulillahi fahuwa ajdam, it is cut. And in that particular narration of the hadith, that is narrated by Abi Dawood. So he begins obviously in the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate. All praise belongs to God alone, who guides us to the knowledge of our first principles and makes easy our understanding of them through the rational capacity He creates within us. I got ahead of myself. I started to comment before. Let us keep ourselves to the following format of reading the Arabic, a direct translation, and then the commentary. So I did the commentary on the Basmala, so let's just jump in beyond that. All praise belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because Allah ta'ala is the one who is deserving of the praise. No one other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who has guided us to our first principles. وَفَّقَنَا لِلْوُصُولِ إِلَى مَعْرِفَةِ الْأُصُولِ. I translate usul as first principles because I want you to understand that these are the first things. These are the first things that form the mind of the Muslim, and from these first things we derive all of our meanings of everything else. This is the science of Islam. This is the discipline, our interpretive methodology. This is the glue that holds everything together. This is the soul of the Muslim intellectual history. It's Usul al Fiqh. That's how important this subject is. It is the subject which brings all other subjects to it. All other subjects are used as tools for us to be able to derive these meanings. So I like to translate it as first principles because, as we will see throughout this course and the next two, in which we basically discuss this, read this and discuss inshallah this whole book, we will learn that these are the principles, the first things, the first principles from which we will derive everything else. And he says, and Allah has made easy our understanding of these principles through the rational capacity He has created within us. And this is why in mantiq, in logic, we call the human being al-hayawan al-natiq, the articulating human being. Our rational faculty, our ability to speak, to understand, to do what we're doing now, to create art, to create poetry, etc. These things are what make us a unique creation. And the aql, the rational capacity in the human being, there are thousands of definitions for that in our literature, but you can sum them up by saying it is the natural faculty through which we know necessary things as long as there is no ailment that we have. So a quote-unquote normal person will come to know rationally normal things. That is a default necessary result of a sound rational capacity. Okay, it's not the most elegant definition, but it sort of kind of explains to you what it is. And then he says, of course, prayers and salutations on our Master Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, his family and his companions. In the Shafi'i madhab, because Shaykh al-Islam is a Shafi'i, and this is the Shafi'i college, the people, the family of the Prophet ﷺ are the believers from Bani Hashim and Bani al-Muttalib, not the other branches of the family of the Prophet or the tribe of the Prophet ﷺ, because these are the two tribes that helped and aided the Prophet ﷺ throughout his da'wah. And then these are the people then upon whom the zakah is forbidden in our traditional fiqh. The companions, of course, are those who believed the Prophet ﷺ, believed in him, saw him, interacted with him, and died with that Islam. If I'm not mistaken, the definition for these type of things will come much later when we talk about this. Actually, it will come later when we talk about the Sunnah. So we can delay our discussion in detail to that. Who were granted victory by God through the acceptance of their acts and deeds. To what proceeds, وبعد. وبعد فهذا مختصر في الأصلين وما معهما اختصرت فيه جمع الجوامع للعلامة التاج السبكي رحمه الله وأبدلت منه غير المعتمد والواضح بهما مع زيادات حسنة ونبهت على خلاف المعتزلة عندنا وغيرهم بالأصح غالبا وسميته لب الأصول راجيا من الله القبول وأسأله النفع به فإنه خير المأمول. And then he says to what precedes, وبعد, this is the structure. Its original is وأما بعد, and always after وبعد comes the letter fa, وبعد fa. And this is, some people say, is attributed to Sayyidina Dawood alayhi salam, وَعَلَّمْنَهُ فَصْلَ الْخِطَابِ. Allah Ta'ala taught him to differentiate in speeches, and it is said that he is the first alayhi salam to speak in such a manner. And he says, rahimahullah, this is a treatise on the foundations of theology and jurisprudence, al-aslaini. The two foundational subjects are Usul al-Din, which is one of the names for theology. I hope you remember when we took the theology class, we talked about the nomenclature for that subject. And Usul al Fiqh, the foundations of jurisprudence, which is the subject that we're in now. Why is he talking about both? Because you can't talk about Usul al Fiqh without talking about theology, and without talking about fiqh, without talking about language, without talking about tasawwuf. He ends the book with tasawwuf, without talking about logic, mantiq, etc. So this is a book that the primary things that we talk about are theological matters, as you will come to see through the definitions. And then he ends with theological matters that lead into tasawwuf. And then it's like a sandwich. And then the meaty part of the sandwich is usul al-fiqh. This is a treatise on the foundations of theology and jurisprudence and those subjects associated with them. Okay, so all of the other subjects that I just mentioned. I summarized the well-known book Jam' al-Jawama by the knowledgeable jurist At-Taj al-Subki rahimahullah, who was the son of Taqi ad-Din al-Subki rahimahumullah. And this is the book of Usul al Fiqh because it merges the two approaches. We have two madhahib in Sunni Usul al Fiqh. We have the approach of the fuqaha, which is a word in this context that means the Hanafis. And then we have the madhab of the mutakallimun, or the madhab of the mutakallimin, which is a reference to the Shafi'is, the Malikis, and the Hanbalis. So I don't want you to, when we say in Usul al Fiqh, we say the fuqaha and the mutakallimun, I don't want you to think that that means jurists and theologians. No, these are mustalahat, special terms in the science of Usul al Fiqh that refers to the Hanafis and the rest. These are the two Sunni approaches. So if you study the history of Usul al Fiqh, you will study the isolated schools. But when we study Usul al Fiqh in the modern age, like with fiqh, we work backwards. So we study the reconciled school that merges the two schools together, which is Jam' al-Jawama, and hence this book, which is a summary of that. And Jam' al-Jawama, there is, I would bet at least a dozen commentaries. He says, Shaykh al-Islam says himself in his own commentary that he based his work on his Shaykh's commentary, Jalal ad-Din al-Mahalli. So al-Mahalli has a commentary on Jam' al-Jawama. Mahalli also has a commentary on the Minhaj of fiqh of Imam al-Nawawi. So Jam' al-Jawama has no shortage of commentaries. It's like the Minhaj for us in fiqh. It's like everyone's commented on that book in Usul al-Fiqh. And then he says, rahimahullah, I replaced non-standard and unclear opinions with those that are standard and clear, with some additions by me. So one of the benefits of this book is when you get into the weeds in Jam' al-Jawama and the Sharh, you will see that there are some opinions that he will advocate, but when you get into the commentary, you'll see that they're not the dominant position. So the reason we study this book, other than the fact that it's smaller, obviously, and we can do it together in this medium, is that he will always say, well, asah, this is the dominant position in the discussion amongst the usulis. And then there are some things that are not clear in the Jam' al-Jawami that he makes clear, and he has some additions, to add some spice to the work. Let me pick up the discussion in the next clip, inshallah. Okay, so we're continuing with our introduction. So we just ended by saying that Shaykh al-Islam rahimahullah says he replaced non-standard and unclear positions in Jam' al-Jawama with the standard and clear positions, and he has some additions of his own. I also make clear the differences we have with the Mu'tazilite with words like, quote, and for us. So the Mu'tazilites, we know them, what al-mutabadir fi dhihn, what we conjure up in our minds immediately is the Mu'tazilites are a group of theologians, non-Sunni theologians, and we have the early fitna and all of that. However, what we forget is that the Mu'tazilites also were a madhab of Usul al Fiqh. Because Usul al Fiqh, as he just mentioned, is sort of like an extension of theology in the sense that you are going to use theological terms in that regard. So the Mu'tazilites are like, our punching bag. We're always going to say, as opposed to the Mu'tazilites. So he does that fabulously, and this is a great specimen of that from our Sunni literature, which he will say, وَعِنْدَنَا, and with us. So when he uses the word us, me, our madhab, our opinion, with us, he means as opposed to the opinions of the Mu'tazilites. فَبِدِدِّهَا تُعْرَفُ الْأَشْيَاء. By opposites, things are known. So if you want to kind of deduce what the Mu'tazilite position is, you just have to see what he says is us, then the opposite of that is the Mu'tazilites. Now this is, I kind of say it jokingly, but we respect everyone, and the Mu'tazilites are brothers and sisters in Islam and faith, but there are, to be academically fair, there are some problematic positions that they have that could lead to very, very weird social situations and theological positions, which is why they never really made it. The concept amongst Orientalists that the Mu'tazilites were the quote-unquote rationalists i.e., we are not rational and they are rational, and had only the rationalists won, Islam would be better. I mean, that's a completely false narrative. They weren't more rational or less rational than we are. They were falsely called rationalists by the Orientalists because they advocated certain amounts of the use of reason in determining certain theological outcomes, as we will come to see actually, inshallah, in today's class. But that doesn't mean that they were rational, meaning that we are irrational, because we also use reason too, but we have a specific definition for it. Anyway, that's neither here nor there, but he will, all throughout the book, oppose to the Mu'tazilites. And then he says, as well as indicate differences with other schools by writing things like, quote, the correct opinion. So when he says al-asah, he is making a claim against the fuqaha, for example, against the Hanafis or other people in the different interpretive schools of Usul al Fiqh. Okay. And then he says, rahimahullah, this treatise is called Lubb al-Usul, the heart of Usul. And through it, I pray that Allah Ta'ala, or God, accepts it and that He allows others to benefit from it, as He is the best of hope. Ameen. And then he says, rahimahullah, وَيَنْحَصِرُ مَقْصُودُهُ فِي مُقَدِّمَاتٍ وَسَبْعَةِ كُتُبٍ. This treatise is based on a lengthy introduction, followed by 7 chapters. So, the chapters are obviously the Kitab, the Quran and the Sunnah, Ijma', Qiyas, Istidlal, and then Ta'arud al-Adillah, when there's differences with the seemingly, I like to say seemingly, or contradictory proofs, and then Ijtihad. Those are the 7 books. The conclusion of the text is the book of Tasawwuf, which is important because Tasawwuf and Ijtihad are the 2 doors, the 2 gates to access the true teachings of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And Shaykh al-Islam rahimahullah himself was a Sufi, and he has a commentary on Risalat al-Qushayri. I have that in my library. And he has a commentary on Khamratul Han, another famous Sufi text, etc. So obviously As-Subki is the one that wrote the Jama' Jawam and had that structure, but this is an important reminder for us that the inner state is just as important as the outer state to access our true interpretive methodology. However, what will occupy us for this entire module is going to be this lengthy, I added the word lengthy because it is very long introduction. I mean, it's almost a third of the entire book. And then when we jump into it, hopefully you'll see why we have such a lengthy introduction. Okay, al-muqaddimat, which is plural of muqaddimah. So, introductory remarks, definitions, etc. أصول الفقه أدلة الفقه الإجمالية وطرق استفادة جزئياتها وحال مستفيدها وقيل معرفتها. Okay, so he says أصول الفقه, which you can translate as jurisprudence or methodology of jurisprudence. Usul al Fiqh is the science that deals with, he's going to name 3 things: general proofs of Islamic law, how to use these general proofs in interpreting the specific proofs of Islamic law, and the conditions of the one who will do this work. In some definitions, it is stated that Usul al Fiqh is knowledge of the general proofs, etc. Okay. Now, I have to make a correction in my translation. So he says, Usul al-Fiqh is the science that deals with the general proofs. General proofs as in opposed to specific proofs. Specific proofs are that there's this hadith that says drinking alcohol is haram. That's the specific proof that drinking alcohol is haram. When the sun moves from the zawal, from the topmost part of the sky, and begins its descent to the west, that's a wada'i proof. That's a proof that's been established. That definition will come shortly. That's the beginning of Salat al-Dhuhr. Those are the specific proofs. Usul al-Fiqh doesn't deal with those. It deals with the general proofs. The general proofs are the ones that are on top of the specific proofs. The things that encompass all of the specific proofs or a cluster of them. Whereas the specific proofs are specific for a specific ruling. So the general proof is the Quran. The Quran is a hujjah. Another general proof is the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the ahadith and his actions and his affirmations. A general proof is ijma', consensus. A general proof is al-qiyas, analogy, which is the heart really of Usul al Fiqh in its most complicated chapter, etc., etc. So those are the general proofs. So Usul al Fiqh then is the science that deals with understanding those general proofs and then how to use the general proofs to interpret the specific proofs in Islamic law. So from the Quran and from the Sunnah, we will bring out and extract from them the specific proofs. So how can you extract that specific hadith that the khamr is haram? How do you know that that's an indication that it's haram and it's not makruh, so on and so forth? The how. Okay, so we are going to learn how to do that. So the first thing is, the first part of the definition is how to use the general proofs, is to know what the general proofs are. Then the second one is how to use the general proofs. And then thirdly, he says the conditions of the one who will do this work, who is the mujtahid. So the person who takes the science of Usul al Fiqh and does it is called the mujtahid. And of course, the mujtahid, there are different types of ijtihad. I don't want you to think of mujtahid, you have to be like Imam al-Shafi'i. That type of ijtihad al-mustaqil no longer exists, because the mental capacity or the mental categories of that type of usul to develop tools of usul al-fiqh, we say ذهب القسم العقلي, that the mental capacity for that no longer exists. In other words, all of the tools that could be invented, or not invented, all of the tools that could be described and used in usul have been described by the mujtahids before us. So no one's going to start a new madhab. But ما دون ذلك, what is below that, the ijtihad is open of different levels. So I want to demystify the concept of ijtihad a little bit. I mean, it's very noble and it's saintly. I'm not trying to reduce it like that. But I also want you to understand that it is something that if you know the subject inside and out, and it's auxiliary sciences, and you do it, then you're called a mujtahid. So therefore, we want to know, where do we look for the proofs of the Sharia? What are our sources? And number two, we need to know how to use those sources, how to read those sources, how to make sense of those sources. And number three, we as the researcher have to have certain prerequisites. That basically right there is the summary of our interpretive methodology. We'll pick this up in the next and final clip. So we were just talking about the definition of Usul al Fiqh in the text, that it is dealing with three things. First, we want to identify what is Islam. Where do we go to find out what Islam is? Do we look at somebody's cultural practice or history book? Say no, we look at the Quran and the Sunnah, ijma' and qiyas, those are the ones that are agreed upon, and then there are the mukhtalaf fihi, the different ones, amal ahl al-Madina al-istihsan, that have to do with the different madhahib. That's what Islam is. Islam is defined in that. Those are our sources. Then we need to know how to read and understand those sources, which is why this is a huge, lengthy introduction, because he's going to go through words and definitions and things like that. And then number three, you yourself as the mujtahid doing this, as the researcher, you have to have the right kind of qualifications. It's not enough just to say, okay, I know the Quran and Sunnah, etc., and I'm going to go research them. No, you have to have the right requisites, which is why the final chapter, the seventh chapter, is in ijtihad, or the mujtahid, or the mustafti, the one that asked the question, and the definition of the mufti. And then he says in some definitions, waqila, it's another weaker position, it's not a very well used definition, not like the one we just said, but he mentions it anyway. Ma'rifatuha, it is knowing the proofs of the general proofs, etc. Okay, and then he's going to say something else now. He's going to talk about the definition of fiqh, which is the opposite of usul al-fiqh. وَالْفِقْهُ عِلْمُ بِحُكْمٍ شَرْعِيٍّ عَمَلِيٍّ مُكْتَسِبٌ مِنْ دَلِيلٍ تَفْصِلِيٍّ. So he says, rahimahullah, fiqh or positive law or sharia As for fiqh, it is the science that deals with the rulings of Islamic law. Al-ahkam, the rulings, that's going to be the next and final definition we do for today, so we'll get to that in a second. It deals with the rulings of Islamic law, which are calls to actions taken from specific proofs. بحكم شرعي عملي. So it's a Sharia ruling, عملي, that calls to actions. Because the Sharia is telling us to do this or not to do this in different degrees. We talked about the five ahkam al-shar'iyya, the wajib, the wajib, haram, mandub, mubah, makruh. And so they are calls to actions. And then they are taken from specific proofs. So like the example of, I believe it's the hadith of Abu Dawood radiallahu anhu, that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, or it is said about the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, naha Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam an kulli muskirin wa mufattirin. That the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam forbade us from having any intoxicant or anything that makes us high. And mufattir is something that gives you like a high, like a type of drug, and the muskir is something that intoxicates you, which is kind of like a low. So that hadith is important because it encompasses both alcohol and derivatives of alcohol, but also other types of drugs and narcotics that would give us the other feeling. And mufattir, at-taftir, is to kind of like be high and like that. So that's a specific text that gives us a specific action, which is non-action. So non-action is a form of action, because a non-action, as we will come to see, is a call to not do something. So action and non-action for us are under the concept of an action, an amali, we're meant to do it. So that's the definition of the fiqh. And then lastly for today's class, al-hukm. And he says, rahimahullah, وَالْحُكْمُ خِطَابُ اللَّهِ الْمُتَعَلِّقُ بِفِعْلِ الْمُكَلِّفِ اقْتِضَاءً أو تخييرا وبأعم وضعا وهو الوارد سببا وشرطا ومانعا وصحيحا وفاسدا فلا يدرك الحكم إلا من الله. So he says, rahimahullah, a Sharia ruling, al-hukm al-shar'i, a Sharia ruling is defined as the following. It is the eternal uncreated speech of God. Kalamullah al-qadim, the eternal uncreated speech of Allah. Of course, he simply says khitabullah, God's speech, but because he is an Ash'ari and he is defending the Ash'ari position as opposed to the Mu'tazilite position, the correct translation of that would be the eternal uncreated speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as you will find in the commentary. So this is an example in which I take from the commentary and I add it to the translation. So my translation is not a verbatim translation of the text. It is much more than the text, but less than the commentary to make sense of the sentences that he has. Anyway, a Sharia ruling is defined as the eternal uncreated speech of God. So here he is defending the Ash'ari position as opposed to the Mu'tazilites who have a concept of khalqul Quran, the creation of the Quran, that we don't have, that relates to the actions of legally responsible people. Al-mukallaf, the legally responsible person, is a person who's mature of age, of sound mind, can hear and can understand. It is relates to the actions of legally responsible people to either act by way of obligations, recommendations, impermissibility, disliked acts or acts contrary to what is preferred, khilaful awla, or to choose to act by way of permissible acts. So in this definition, he says it's Allah's speech to us to act or to choose to act. Because the mandub, you can do it or not do it. So to be fair to the definition, that's actually not a call from Allah Ta'ala for us that we have to act or stay away. We can choose to act. So the mubah act, did I say mandub? I meant mubah. Afwan. Mubah. The mubah act, we can do it or not do it. It's mubah. So fiqh is a precise instrument, and usul al Fiqh is a very precise instrument. So we're going to sweat over all of these details in this class. So again, a Sharia ruling is defined as the eternal uncreated speech of God that relates to the actions of legally responsible people to either act or choose to act. To act, that involves the obligation, the wajib, the recommended, the mandub, the impermissibility, the haram, the disliked act, the makruh, and acts contrary to what is preferred, khilaful awla, or to choose to act, which is the mubah act. A Sharia ruling is also more generally understood, so this is a secondary definition, but you need this secondary definition as opposed to the secondary definition of Usul al Fiqh, which we are not going to use. A Sharia ruling is also more generally understood as established rulings that make an act a cause, a condition, a preventative, or sound or not sound. In reality, only God knows the exact ruling. Okay, so that's the second sentence. A Sharia ruling is more generally understood. Here he's going to talk about al-ahkam al-wad'iyya. These are the established things that come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning that something is a cause of something. The iskar, intoxication, is the cause of it being haram, or a condition, or something that is a mana, it prevents us. Not having wudu prevents us from praying. So having wudu is a condition for the prayer being valid. Or something can be sound or not sound. As-sihhatu wal-fasad. How can your prayer be sound? That the time of prayer has come in, that you've made wudu, that you are tahir, that you are facing the qibla, and that you do all of the arkan. All of those boxes are checked, the prayer is valid. But let's say you do all of those things and you pray salat al-duhr before the adhan by half an hour. Then the salah is fasid, it's not sound. So the Sharia ruling, al-hukm al-shar'i, involves the ahkam of the 5 ahkam of our actions, and al-ahkam al-wad'iyya, the things that Allah Ta'ala has established for us. That some things can be a cause, a condition, a preventative, etc. And then he says at the end, to kind of poke at the Mu'tazilites, in reality, only God knows the exact ruling. فَلَا يُدْرَكُ حُكْمٌ إِلَّا مِنَ اللَّهِ. In other words, rationally, we cannot capture the full meaning of the hukm. Only Allah can. So we say that this is kashifun an hukmillah. This is an indication of Allah's ruling. We don't say that this is Allah's ruling. The correct way of saying it is this, we believe elucidates Allah's ruling. Why? Allahu a'lam, only Allah Ta'ala knows what He wants. Whereas the Mu'tazilites will argue, no, with our rational capacity we can know exactly what Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala wants, which is a theological problem because not everything in the Sharia is rational, or else it's a religion, it's not a rational philosophy. So this is a little poke at the Mu'tazilites, and we'll put a pin in it here. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam, wa sallallahu ala sayyidina wa maulana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. So alhamdulillah, we concluded our first class in reading Lubb al-Usul. I'm very excited because this is a very special book to me, and I mean, I didn't talk about that in the beginning, but it's a personal thing for me, and Allah Ta'ala blessed me to have translated it, so I'm excited to share the translation with you, to read it once again and work through the kinks of the translation. So today what we did is we simply read the introduction, and then we read the first 3 definitions, the definitions of Usul al Fiqh, and the Sharia rulings. The style of this class is pretty much how I'm going to carry out for the rest of this module and the other 2 in which we will finish, inshallah, the entire book. In other words, we will read piecemeal Arabic, then we will do the translation. Sometimes you'll see me jotting down, maybe like as I'm recording this, I'm like, there's a better way to translate it. Inshallah, the translation is accurate, but there's like a never-ending process of improving the translation. And then we'll provide the commentary. The commentary is basically based on Shaykh al-Islam himself's own commentary on his book, which oftentimes, as you noticed in this first class, I bring about in my translation, because the Lubb al-Usul text is so condensed that sometimes it's impossible, and there are many instances where it was impossible to translate the text. I had to not only go to Ghayat al-Usul, his own commentary, but I would have to go to the Hawashi on Jam' al-Jawama to understand what he's trying to say, because it's so condensed. So one of the benefits of this translation is it's much more than literal translation of the text, and it is less than the commentary of Shaykh al-Islam himself, rahimahullah. But it's sort of like a mini commentary. In many ways, the way Ibn Qasim is a mini commentary on the Met of Abi Shuja'. And so we took the definition of Usul al Fiqh, and we learned that we focus on three things: where our sources are, how to read our sources, and the prerequisites for the person researching in those sources. And then we looked at fiqh, looking at the specific rulings and proofs for the rulings of the Sharia. And then finally we looked at the Sharia rulings definition, which it encompasses the 5 ahkam al-shar'iyya plus the other 5, which are the wada'iyya, established by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that something can be a cause, a condition, a preventative, and an act can be sound or unsound. And then we concluded by saying only Allah ta'ala knows the exact ruling, because this is the Ash'ari or Sunni position, a theological position, as opposed to the Mu'tazilites. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina wa Mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.